The Catholic Church has officially repudiated the concepts in the Doctrine of Discovery that said any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered and Indigenous peoples could be overthrown. Today, some are saying the church still hasn't gone far enough. The CBC's Sarah Levitt is standing by in Montreal. She's covering this story for us. Sarah.
So, Arthi, this statement from the Vatican is essentially an apology for the Doctrine of Discovery. And, you know, that's as you said, the Catholic Church theory that dates back to the 1400s that essentially legitimized the seizure of Indigenous land. It led to, it kind of gave the green light for colonization. Now the Vatican is saying this doctrine, I'll just quote, did not adequately reflect the equal dignity and rights of Indigenous peoples. Now, we know that rejecting the doctrine was one of the demands that the Canadian Indigenous peoples had when Pope Francis visited Canada last year. It's complicated language, of course. Everything is very careful when it comes to the Catholic Church. And so it is being repudiated, not rescinded. So it's essentially apologizing, but not fully rejecting the papal bulls that involve this.
And of course, since this news broke this morning, there's been lots of reaction. What have you heard so far?
Well, you know, exactly on that question of whether it's rescinded or repudiated, if you recall, when the Pope visited the church near Quebec City, there were two women that stood up during the service and held a flag that said rescind the doctrine. So some not very happy that the church is using repudiated rather than rescinded. But a note that it does appear that this meets the call to Action 49 from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I'll just read from that to you. We call upon all religious denominations and faith groups who have not already done so to repudiate concepts used to justify European sovereignty over Indigenous lands and peoples, such as the Doctrine of Discovery. And, you know, these papal bulls, they basically formed the basis of many property laws around the world that still exist today. So the question is, what happens now? Here's the Chief Commissioner from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women.
What the point is now is all of us, all Canadians, have to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and say, okay, just then what was the basis and what remains the basis for Canada as a country or as a nation, having the underlying title to all of the land here.
And Arthi, you know, I mentioned this is complex. There's the use of complicated language here and exactly what the Vatican is saying in its statement. But this also does affect Indigenous people around the world. Let's hear from a Shawnee scholar and an expert on the doctrine.
We're talking about very clear patterns of domination and empire that have been used against our nations and peoples and continue to be used against our nations and peoples to this day. And that is the kind of specific language that the Vatican is not quoting and not copying to. They're not coming clean with that horrible historical record.
So the question here now is this a first step forward? What happens now? And is this statement going to lead to anything, or is it truly just symbolic? Arthi?
We know you'll continue to track it. A lot of steps to come. That is the CBC Sarah Levitt in Montreal.